Hi, Dad. You look tired.
Oh, thanks. I needed that.
Somebody's out there.
What's your connection with this fella?
Alice's lawyer.
Where are you? Where are you?
Who are you and what do you want from me?
I am but a pup, if that's what you're afraid of.
A crime of sheer genius that builds to a climax of sheer terror. He doesn't suspect.
Not at all. He will tell me soon.
Every good man's got to wrestle with the devil.
I want you the hell off my property! You son of a...
You, sir, will be hearing from the Ethics Committee.
We got this freaking psychopath in our faces? I mean, who knows what's true and what isn't?
I'm just losing my mind here.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
We're talking more Cronenberg and ultimately his fear of penetration, so join the sleaze.
We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for almost 3 years now, which is insane.
Creeping up.
And also our bonus transmission series where we talk about new release genre movies, which, believe it or not, there are movies coming out. We just talked about Giant Russell Crowe in Unhinged, and also Pure Flicks John Wick. Which is, or John Wick at Home for Christian parents.
Yes, definitely.
So if you have any interest in any of that, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. And speaking of which, we did have a lot of people make the jump this week, so we're going to give them their shout-outs. We had Dylan Seeley, Austin Ammer, Scott Morris, Rob Harvey, Jeremy Pollack, Riley Danson. Oh, the Scandinavian guys. They're okay, here we go.
Give it your best.
Halvoror Jan Gudmundsson?
And is he like a prince? That's awesome.
It's pretty. It's a pretty sick name, I'm not going to lie.
That is killer.
This show has become... listen to Josh mispronounce your name at the beginning of every episode.
Absolutely.
Scoot Regal, Jeffrey Skull, and Brian Corcoran, Alvin Amorti, Riley Pelling, and that's everyone.
Awesome. Thank you,
Thanks
guys.
so much.
Appreciate
thanks so much
you.
for signing up. Hope you guys are enjoying all those bonus episodes. That's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts. If you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, and I know you are, I see the stats. I see you right now listening on Apple Podcasts. While you're listening to this exact intro, scroll down to the bottom, give us a good old rating and review down there, preferably a positive one. Helps us climb the ranks over at iTunes and helps us find new listeners that way. We appreciate that as well.
And if it is negative, make it funny. That's all I ask.
Yeah, there's a couple funny negative ones out there. At some point, we're gonna have to go back to reading some of them out on the show.
Oh yeah, I would love to do that.
But yeah, that's all the plugs for the week. Welcome back to another episode. As always, I'm your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, guys.
Welcome. I think 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks would have heard from us, and we would have been in the thick of Noirvember. So we had special guest Dr. Peter Labuza on to do Phantom Lady 1944 and May God Forgive Me 1948. We talked about sort of Joan Harrison, who was a regular collaborator of Hitchcock, kind of taking the reins over and making her own sort of quasi-feminist noir. And then May God Forgive Me, which was another one of those films that, good luck finding it out there. Peter had to send us a direct link that he uploaded for us, because it is a sort of underseen Mexican noir starring Maria Felix.
And we had to use fun watch. We had to use YouTube translation, so that's how crazy we had to get with that one.
Yeah, we got the broad strokes of that one. Between the three of us, we figured out what the plot of the movie was. But as always, the filmmaking itself, I think, carried much of that film through it. So sometimes it's cool to just have a test experiment on how a movie works when you don't understand the dialogue.
Yeah, for sure.
But then last week we kind of did the big episode of Noirvember because there is a little film out there called, maybe you've heard of it, it's called Mank. Everyone's got Mank fever. They're manking out. David Fincher's Mank, obviously about the production of Citizen Kane, and we realized as a result we haven't done Orson Welles on the show yet. So last week for the bonus listeners exclusively over on the Patreon, we talked about The Lady from Shanghai, as well as The Third Man. We wanted to talk about 40s Orson Welles because that's the period that Mank takes place in, and there's not a lot of 40s Orson Welles that really fits the show. He wasn't a big genre head. We could have done The Stranger from the 40s, and later on at some point we're definitely going to do Touch of Evil, but Lady from Shanghai, very cool noir, and then The Third Man, it is a film school classic, respecting the classics, as our friends at Extended Clip like to say. So if you want that episode, that was last week's bonus episode. Go ahead, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. Yeah. But this week, we're in the first week of December now. We are out of Noirvember, but we decided, you know what, let's stick around in the crime realm. And to do that with us, we have a special guest, a writer for Film School Rejects, Anna Swanson. Anna, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing pretty well. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited for this episode.
Us too. You brought on a Toronto classic that neither of us had seen, and as good Canadian boys, we felt a little ashamed of ourselves.
Ooh, yeah, that's exciting. I didn't know you both hadn't seen it. I got to bring a little bit of Toronto to this.
Absolutely. Hell yeah. Well, what two films have you brought with you this week, and why do they pair together?
I have brought The Silent Partner and Cape Fear. And so I paired these two together because when you asked me to be on the show, definitely one of the first movies that came to mind was The Silent Partner. It's just a real, kind of underrated / underseen tax shelter gem. It's Toronto, it's Christmas, and now we're kind of entering December-ish, getting close there. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, it's a appropriate time for it. And among the things that this film does, it's kind of this very quintessential story of like the everyman who goes up against a villain who like isn't just bad, but is, real kind of slimy and just, a real bad guy. And I think that one of the other movies that does that idea very well is Scorsese's Cape Fear. Mm-hmm. So, here we are, just here to talk about, good versus evil.
Yeah, right. Well, and one thing I thought that was sort of interesting Biblical. Too, that kind of paired them together was that both of the leading roles are a little bit thornier than you would expect too, because as much as the villains of the film are absolutely slimy psychos, both the Elliot Gould and the Nick Nolte character in this are both slightly more morally ambiguous than you would expect of people going up against that, and both films kind of take that into account. I know that Scorsese, for sure, when he read the screenplay for the Cape Fear remake, he was like, man, Nick Nolte is too good of a person and the family is too nice. So they actually did rewrites where like they introduced some thornier elements. But we'll get into that when we get into both films here.
Yeah, but they're definitely like good guys who do something bad to a much worse person.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, that being said, I think we're going to jump right into it here. We are going to start off with The Silent Partner.
I don't know how you managed to pull it off. Well, I guess you're going to have to tell me one of these days. But we worked it together, didn't we?
I thought I knew you. You've changed.
I'm going to kill you, so help me. I'm going to kill you. Starring Elliot Gould, Christopher Plummer, and Susanna York.
One night, when you come home, you'll find me on the inside, and that'll be the night you'll wish you'd never been born.
It was the only way to make him the silent partner.
All right, we are talking The Silent Partner, the 1978 Canadian heist film, and apparently a remake of the 1969 Danish film Think of a Number, which is based on a Danish novel. The film was directed by Daryl Duke, and I was incredibly shocked to learn written by Curtis Hanson.
What did he do?
He is some people will probably know him as the director and writer of LA Confidential, but he also directed like 8 Mile and Wonder Boys.
Oh, right.
And yeah, obviously back in the day too, he wrote like I think he wrote White Dog for Sam Fuller.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've heard of that one. That's a pretty wild one, right?
So early in his career, he got started kind of like as a writer and adapting novels. And this appeared to be one of those, and I didn't realize until I saw his name in the credits, and I was like, that is interesting.
Yeah.
But the film stars Elliot Gould as a character named Miles Cullen, and Christopher Plummer as an absolute fucking psycho named Reichel. And in the peripheries, we also have Susanna York. Obviously, some people might know her from the Superman films. I know her personally from Robert Altman's Images, which is a very cool little film. She's so good in it too. But very broadly, the film follows Elliot Gould's character, who is kind of like an unassuming and kind of bored bank teller when the film begins, who realizes that they're one of the local Santa Claus at the mall that he works at, which is obviously the Eaton Center in Toronto for any Canadians out there, and that his bank is actually going to be robbed, and he thinks that it's going to be robbed by one of these Santas because he's getting some bad vibes, and he also finds a banknote that has a threat written on it saying I have a gun, give me all the money. So but what's really interesting about this character right off the bat with Elliot Gould is that his first instinct isn't to warn anybody or to, try to intervene in that. His thought is, how could I use this situation to my advantage? And what kind of the sort of kickstarting event of the film is him deciding that what if he can steal all of that money by hiding it in his own lunchbox, and then by the time the guy actually comes to rob him, he only gives him the float of cash, and then everyone assumes that this money disappeared because the bank robber stole it, but the bank robber actually only ran away with the float, and Elliot Gould took the remaining. I believe it's what the exact figure comes up a million times. $48,350.
That's the one.
Think of a number.
But we'll get into some of the specifics because there's some cool ways that scene plays out. But essentially, after that, the film becomes a kind of a cat and mouse procedural, a series of sort of action and reactions based on this inciting incident, with a lot of double crossing and triple crossing. It actually has like a pretty clockwork plotting to it in the writing, and it's realized by Daryl Duke in some very decently done, almost occasionally Hitchcockian suspense sequences, despite the fact that this is again, as Anna mentioned, a tax shelter Canadian film, a true blue Canucksploitation movie that was basically made to launder money.
Oh, okay.
But hey, it's a pretty good film.
Yeah, that's the thing. As long as it's a good film, you can do what you like.
Yeah. I mean, well, I was reminded personally of it has a little bit of that 70s existential crime film in it, something like a little bit of Walter Hill in there, a little bit of, we've talked about on the show, the early days of David Cronenberg when he was making Canadian funded independent films like Shivers and Rabid. Rabid actually also has a mall Santa scene, I think in Montreal though.
Right.
But it also reminded me of a true blue exploitation film out of Canada, Sudden Fury, which was like a small budget Canadian Hitchcock thriller about a Toronto real estate fraud basically getting into a car accident and in the heat of the moment deciding to leave his wife to die in the wreckage because she refuses to loan him money for his scheme. And then he spends most of that movie simply trying to escape the immediate subsequent consequences and collateral damage of like that decision. And it basically just follows like the logistics of like, how does he escape that situation, what goes wrong in that situation. And this has a very similar kind of layout to it, where it's the logistical thrill of the constant sense of Elliot Gould makes a decision which triggers something that happens, which then he has to react to as well, and it gets to some pretty horrible places.
But in that movie, the Hitchcock movie, just comparing characters, does he paint that guy as more of an asshole even behind the scenes? Because it seems like with Elliot, like although he's doing all these pretty awful things, he still throughout the film plays him very like timidly and very almost innocently. Mm-hmm. And I found that interesting. Is there a difference there with that Alfred Hitchcock character? Because I found that very interesting in this movie. It's just the fact that he's almost like just very average, but the actions that he's doing are clearly horrible and getting other people into trouble and violence and all that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think Elliot Gould is just as an actor is a huge thing for that. Obviously, he's hot off The Long Goodbye and off Nashville, and I personally just find him very kind of charismatic in that kind of way, even when he's playing a super quiet character. Sure. And I do think that he's definitely less psycho than the character from Sudden Fury. He just makes some
it's like a mask
decisions
almost.
That obviously endanger people. And yeah, definitely. There's a great line at one point in the film where someone talks about the fact that the boss underestimates you. I think
right.
Lots of people underestimate you because he becomes a little bit more suave once he has $50 in his bank or $50,000 in his bank account, which is also just kind of cute. Hearing people talk about $50,000 and like killing each other over it. It's pretty good.
Absolutely.
But Anna, what was the when did you watch this for the first time?
So I saw this a couple years ago. Theater in Toronto showed it. It was very fun. It was a print, and
oh my god,
I don't know exactly what had happened, but it was kind of like all of it tinted red, like this kind of fuchsia-y, pinkish red, a very like festive color, and it was screened here for Christmas, like in December at some point. And then I also watched this. So I've seen this twice in a theater, which is very lucky. The Paradise, which just reopened in Toronto earlier this year, or at the start of the year, they showed it in January on my birthday. So amazing. I got to just like take a bunch of friends and say, hey, it's my birthday. We're going to go see this like heist movie from the 70s. And you can't say no because it's my birthday. And
that's how you do it.
Yeah, thankfully everyone really liked it. And, I'm like kind of low-key obsessed with Elliot Gould. Like he's the best. So just, this kind of became like an instant favorite, even though I only discovered it myself maybe 2 years ago now.
Yeah, I mean, Elliot Gould is very. Obviously, The Long Goodbye is just one of my favorite films. So it was awesome to get him doing something, sort of in a similar realm. Because in that he's a little bit more of an active agent, but in The Long Goodbye, he's definitely got that kind of like drifter voyeur quality to him, and a lot of that is used here in The Silent Partner, where it reminded me a lot of, like when I was speaking of Hitchcockian, it reminded me, especially in the early sequences, of something like Rear Window. It's a lot of him just observing things at work because he's kind of bored and he kind of has the time for his attention to wander. And that is actually the reason that he picks up on all of these details, that there is going to be a robbery at his bank. Is because he just has that time to sit around. And what's so interesting also is that similarly to Rear Window, you are sort of implicated in that subjective point of view, where again, as I mentioned, his first immediate reaction is not to raise to the attention that anyone is in danger of being threatened with a gun at the bank. His decision instead is to basically try to use it to his own advantage and figure out what he's going to do. And I love that, the way that Duke and Hansen have sort of put it together here is that we are introduced to him, grabbing his lunchbox from home. And you're like, okay, this is a weird reaction to finding out that, you're going to have a gun pointed at you probably in the next, few hours. Yeah. And you don't really get to pick up on the details of what he's doing other than we see his silent decision-making process. And then through that, we kind of figure out, oh, he's stuffing the cash into the box. And what was so funny is I was watching the film for the first time, obviously, I thought that he was just a Boy Scout. I thought that he was just trying to find a way to save the bank money.
So did I.
like when he was putting the money into the lunchbox, my first thought was, okay, so he's just thinking ahead on, he's going to be the hero and he's going to make sure the guy doesn't get away with, with all of the money. And as someone who has obviously worked as a cashier before too, I was just like, this is the point of view that sort of like makes sense to me a little bit.
Especially with how he plays his character. Just so innocently in a sense.
Yeah, definitely.
That's such an exceptionally Canadian response to being robbed. Like, well, I gotta save the bank money.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe any Americans watching the same film will not have that reaction, but that was exactly what I was thinking.
I mean, it's set in Toronto, we gotta put that Canadian likeness in there.
Yeah, I gotta note that it's a Superman lunchbox, which I think is both very cute for that character, but also kind of fun with Susanna York being in the movie.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Well, and what's funny too is that this obviously is taking place at Christmas time. It's taking place in the mall. You have a lot of these festive colors. You have the Santa coming up, and there's a great line too where they talk about how like the Santa is kind of cold, and they were like, "Have you ever seen a Santa who doesn't like kids?"
Yeah, because the kid's like coming up to him and like, Santa, I want a toy, and he's like actually trying to grab like Santa's gun that he has in his pocket, and I'm just like, oh my god.
Yeah, the kid saves like the first robbery. I think Santa's so annoyed. He's like, "Fuck it, I'll do it tomorrow."
Yeah, and also I didn't realize at first that it was Christopher Plummer in the Santa outfit.
Yeah, for real.
But yeah, when he approaches as Santa, and instead of giving him all of the money because he just saw a dude make a deposit of like $40,000, he just gives him the float. And he's like, no, I just watched that guy give you more money. You have to like give it all to me. And Elliot Gould at that point triggers the alarm. And also, mall cops in the 70s, I guessed, were just like military people.
Oh man, they were just popping caps. Like that guy is just shooting into the crowd of
civilian packed escalators.
He's just going, just shooting it off. It's a wild thing to see him like just run up the escalator, and he's still shooting with like 15 people surrounding him. It's crazy.
Just like packed Eaton Center mall at Christmas.
Yeah,
and it's just like, we're just gonna fire it off.
And in Canada, so that was a little shocking to me too.
Yeah, well, I thought it was particularly funny because that escalator, I used to take it like every day to school. Like obviously I went to school near Yonge and Dundas.
Traumatized you a little bit?
Yeah, I was watching that escalator and I was just like, damn, man, a good thing I'd never got shot in a crossfire with a Santa before.
With a Santa Claus. Not a good Christmas.
It's revealed that Chris Plummer is playing the Santa, and we last talked about Chris Plummer. It's so awesome seeing. I mean, Chris Plummer, in my opinion, even as early as I've seen him, he never really looked super young in the movies. This is the youngest Chris Plummer you're gonna see, other than probably some of the closer to stage work he kind of did in the early 70s and the late 60s.
Did we do that one movie with him where he played Sherlock Holmes? Was that
yes,
Plummer? That was kind of a younger one, I thought.
Yeah, well, I thought it was funny. I actually went back and looked at that because I was watching Silent Partner and I was going, man, is this the youngest thing I've ever seen Christopher Plummer in? And I went back and saw we did Murder by Decree by Bob Clark, another Canadian low-budget genre film from 1979.
Okay.
And I watched it, and he actually does have the gray hair and everything going on in that.
Oh, okay.
So I was like, damn, clearly not that young, or at least made to look older for playing the role of Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
But here, he actually does have, like, for some reason, like a young, like, badass, like, hip look to him for some reason that I couldn't exactly figure out. Because obviously we don't explore too much of his character background or anything like that. But I was like, it was kind of bizarre seeing Christopher Plummer, like very esteemed Canadian old man actor, wearing like a tank top and a chain. And he's got like holes in his shirt.
It reminded me a little bit of like when Rutger Hauer played the bad guy in Nighthawks. Where it was like he has this kind of smooth suaveness to him a little bit, but he's still a complete psychopath.
Yeah, and it's just very interesting context to see Christopher Plummer, because I always just think of him as like kind of like a prestige-y grandpa kind of role now.
Yeah, for sure.
And we will say anyway, Christopher Plummer gets real slimy in this movie.
Yeah,
Oh my
he's
God.
bad.
Yeah,
the first thing he does
gross.
when he's running away from the security guard in order to get the lady out of the way that's in blocking the entrance, he just straight up punches her in the face, and then like he does a ton of violence. Honestly, mostly to like women in this a lot of the time, and then at the tail end, there's this kind of thing where he dresses up, which we'll get to. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I was not crazy about that shot of him just putting his bare foot on a woman's face.
Man, yeah. That was some
really horrible image.
Yeah, really filthy stuff right here for sure. And he's in like some weird sex sauna or something like that. So there's just like levels of seediness that just layer on top of each other.
And there's like a line when he's leaving that scene that I think someone says like, "Oh, you went too far this time." I'm like, what did he do last time?
Yeah, like what is the average day for this guy?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God.
Yeah, and obviously it's implied in some way that he's very angry about the day's events, and he's taking it out obviously on the prostitute character here. But what's sort of interesting is that Elliot Gould, obviously, he gets to play the hero who sort of like prevented a robbery, and Christopher Plummer's just watching him on TV and just getting like absolutely furious because he was like, I should have gotten away with $50,000, and instead here's this guy who clearly took that money for himself, or at least I'm the only one who knows that they're saying that $50,000 is missing, and I know I don't have it. So Elliot Gould has, sort of got one up on him. And the rest of the movie is honestly just a series of Elliot Gould cucking Christopher Plummer at one point, like actually, literally.
Yeah.
That is what most of the movie is. And then Christopher Plummer getting very, very angry about it and, deciding to pursue him in a sort of like, again, a cat and mouse, mano a mano style thriller. And it maintains that sort of like procedural element to it, and that kind of like wit to it as well, which I kind of appreciated. Like both characters in their own way are kind of smart, or they have plans that make sense to you when you think them through, and then it's just a constant sense of one-upmanship after that, which is
There's even stuff like where Elliot has the opportunity to actually put him away, and he doesn't do it just because he knows it would screw him over. So there's always these like smart little decisions he's making to get Plummer in trouble as much as he can, but without getting him caught as well, because Plummer knows so much information. So yeah, there's a lot of really intelligent dialogue and sequences that do that.
Mm-hmm. I was also I remember the first time I saw this, I was very surprised that, I hadn't really seen a heist movie that does something like this before. And it seems like one of those, really ingenious but fairly simple concepts where it's like you work at a bank, you get the sense that it's going to be robbed, you put a little to the side, everyone thinks the robber got away with the full amount, and you kind of get to walk out scot-free. Like it's very clever, but it's sort of very like straightforward where you're like, oh yeah, like if you have a character that works at a bank and that happens, like that totally makes sense that that's something that they would try to do. So I just think it's like a wonderful conceit right out the bat that it really sets up something that is, very crafty and smart, but also totally believable.
Yeah, especially with Elliot's character, because once again, like through his kind of timidness, you wouldn't think he would do something like this, but the way that he does it really does fit with his character,
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah, and then as you mentioned too, you start to realize over the course of the film that sort of unassuming, kind of timid character is almost in some way not who he really is, and that's kind of how he's able to get away with what some of the decisions that he makes is because, again, people underestimate him based on his appearance. And what's so funny is that also applies to Christopher Plummer's character, who when he realizes that we are the only two people in the world who know about this missing money and where it actually went. I think he calls him from the the payphone, and he says, "We both took the same risk. We're partners now." And like that's where obviously they get the title from the silent partner, because they are partners without actually having to communicate with each other.
Yeah,
and
I'm going to become the silent partner.
That's right. That's the moment. Because he stole the money before the robber even could. And then Plumber immediately is just like, all I want is that money. Just give me that money, man, and I won't make your life like a living hell. By the way, also, that scene where Plumber confronts him, Plumber has got the scariest eyes and eyebrows in the game.
That shot of him in the mailbox, just like looking, it's so good.
It's terrifying. Yeah, it's straight
Isn't
up
that
terrifying.
how is that even possible that someone is like menacing just looking through a mailbox?
Mail slot? Yeah. Like.
And that, like,
dude.
you know, it's Christopher Plummer, who, like you said, like, he's kind of this, like, sweet grandfatherly figure in cinema often. And now it's just, like, you just see this small portion of his face, and he looks so scary.
Yeah, and there's also kind of like an added element to watching Miles like push all that stuff in front of the door, just make a really sturdy barricade, and then Christopher Plummer still finds a way to like terrify him just through the mail slot. It's just this small little detail. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and he's like, next time I'll be inside.
Right. Yeah.
And there's
Which
lots
does.
of times throughout the film, where he comes back to his apartment and he's been inside while he's been gone.
And and I guess that kind of introduces like Miles has this this hobby, I guess, where he collects really expensive and rare fish. And one time where he goes, he has like a blowfish on like 6-month layaway or something like that. I don't know. And Christopher Plummer, like when he walks in, he sees his whole apartment trashed, or Elliot sees his whole apartment trashed, and Plummer fucking stabbed one of the fishes and pinned it to the wall with a knife. Like, just these very like personal things that he ends up doing eventually too are pretty effective.
Mm-hmm. Also, I gotta say, so the initial scene where we sort of see him and Susanna York go into the fish store, and he's talking about how, I ordered this fish 6 weeks ago. It's so cute, and it's so like, it's, I don't know, the way that Gould plays that is just lovely. And like, I love this film. I think the little ingredient that would have just like pushed this all into an all-timer, like beyond, is I would have loved if like in that scene the fish he was picking up was a beta. Just like with his character. The whole time I was watching it, I was like, oh, that would be like the cherry on top.
That would be hilarious.
But it's like an angelfish or something.
Yeah,
great.
It's an angelfish. Well, because it's interesting with Susanna York's character, who is a coworker of his at the bank, is sort of interesting because he is obviously interested in her, and I think near the beginning of the film he even kind of like asks her out, but she's actually seeing the manager of the bank, who is also married. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is that Elliot Gould like immediately is kind of upset with her, obviously, about that, and then she very pointedly, sort of fires back at him like, are you upset that I'm seeing a married man, or are you upset that I'm just not seeing you? And he sits there in that for a second. Yeah, it's a really important element to it, because like Elliot Gould, again, he has this personality of being so timid and unassuming, but he actually does have this sort of this very subtly kind of aggressive behavior sometimes. Yeah. And it's only when he gets that money and he gets that confidence and he gets that other people start sort of picking up on him. And it's so funny watching Elliot Gould, go around his boss's party like he's the coolest guy on the planet because he just robbed his own bank and no one knows about it.
Yeah. Something I also like about his character, I never get this vibe that although he ends up doing some really horrible things, like taking advantage of Julie while he's kind of pulling off the heist and all of that, like really takes advantage of her emotions. It never seems to me like he realizes the bad things that he's doing. Like there's always this layer of like the mask that he doesn't really realize he's wearing. I don't know if you got that same kind of vibe. I feel like he thinks of himself as the good guy, even though we're witnessing him do kind of awful things.
Oh, definitely. I think his character just kind of sees it as this is just the natural ladder climbing way of the world.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is you manipulate and you spin to your advantage. And it is interesting being in that kind of point of view, because you realize that, that's what kind of, in some ways, that's also what Christopher Plummer's character is doing. So it's interesting that you kind of get this twin sides of people trying to spin their environments a little bit to their own advantage. Obviously, Christopher Plummer is just willing to go way more psychotic with it. And actually, it's very similar to the way that Cape Fear is set up, too, where you get the sort of like twin sides of lawyers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just found the actual suspense sequencing itself like very well done. I really love that, Elliot Gold, he's at first kind of shocked, obviously, that the robber has found him because he saw him on TV, and that the robber, Christopher Plummer's character, is, planning to very intentionally hunt him down until he gets that money back. And he's calling him at work. He's trying to freak him out. But once Elliot Gold realizes the situation he's in, again, he doesn't immediately go, holy shit, I've been made. I'll just give him the money and he'll fuck off. His immediate reaction is, how can I continue this? In continuing to endanger himself, to endanger everyone around him. Yeah. But he basically says, no, screw that. I won this money sort of like fair and square, so I'm not going to give it to him. And watching him begin to outmaneuver Christopher Plummer, like when he, invites him up and says, fine, you can come up and talk to me about it and we'll figure this out. He invites him into his apartment, but then he makes his way down and then calls his own apartment from the payphone that Christopher Plummer was just at, like creating like an exact replica shot of where they have switched positions in the frame. And what does he go? He goes, it's me, go fuck yourself. And then he just runs away.
The animal has been unleashed.
I also love the staging with like the phone booth like kind of right outside the apartment, and how much they use that. Like just, the scenes of him speaking to Christopher Plummer, and like you can see him and they're talking on the phone, and like there's that division, but they're very close. I just think it's like it's used so well, and I like that they kind of keep it up. Yeah, I love that.
I specifically love how many times people who are on the phone on the second floor in the apartment have to like run as fast as they can all the way down the stairs and out the door, and by the time they make it, the person's not at the payphone anymore. That happens like 3 or 4 times in the movie. But shortly after, he actually frames Christopher Plummer for a stolen van that he actually steals, but then makes a tip call to the police in like a very funny voice to get Christopher Plummer arrested for it. And then Jamie already brought it up, but there's the scene where he goes into basically behind the two-way mirror where he's going to identify the robber, and he's given an opportunity to be like, is one of these guys the guys who held up the bank? And he very strategically, even though he knows it's Christopher Plummer, he says that the man is not there, because he realizes that if he said anything and he identified himself as the robber, then Christopher Plummer would be free to, start telling his side of the story. But because he never identified, but because he doesn't identify him, it's in Christopher Plummer's best interest to not go, hey, I'm the robber, and that guy's also the robber.
Yeah.
So again, there's a lot of smart, like, again, as Anna put it, very simple writing, but writing that, overall actually just ends up making the characters feel just a little bit smarter and a little bit more realistic in that kind of way.
Yeah.
But they introduced this subplot of a woman named Elaine, played by the French-Canadian actress Celine Lomez, who shows up at Elliot Gould's, like, I think it's his dad's funeral that he's attending. And she, it's revealed, is actually working for Plummer, but becomes sort of romantically entangled with, of course, the dashing Elliot Gould.
She tells him she was his dad's nurse, and that's sort of their meet cute. They start dating.
And I love the just the imagery of like Miles with her in the convertible in that nice car. There is just a really smooth and suaveness to that scene where they're flirting back and forth. I did really like that, even though you know what Miles is doing behind the scenes. And I guess we don't know who this girl is yet, but we will.
Yeah, but there's this interesting thing where like she's obviously performing a little bit of a character towards him, and she's talking about, I saw you on the television, and you must have been so scared to have that gun pointed at you. And I think his response is like, it was exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
And obviously. Yeah, and what's interesting is that there's something that sort of like sparked a little bit between them about sort of like the danger that they're in. It kind of seems like, because she knows that she's working for Christopher Plummer, a very dangerous character, and she knows that this guy is obviously capable of more than his appearance, and it ends up sort of like translating a little bit to their their actual relationship that they end up having. And then he kind of chooses her a little bit as a bit of a partner in crime, because at one point in the film he loses his safety deposit key because he put all of that money that he stole into a safety deposit box in the bank, and he put the key in like an old
to the bank.
Yeah, so he technically gave the money back to the bank, or he's keeping it there. Mm-hmm. And it's so funny when he says that to Christopher Plummer, he's like, it's at the bank. And Christopher Plummer is like, you fucking clever bitch. Keeping it at the bank. That's so smart. But the key he keeps inside like an expired jar of jam, I think.
Yeah.
And his maid throws the jar out because she's like, what? It was expired.
It was bad.
And he starts freaking out about that.
I need to interject. I love when he gets home and she says that she threw out the jam, and he runs downstairs because he had just seen the garbage truck pulling away, and he kind of isn't sure what to do, and he does this thing of like running towards the street as if he's going to go back, and then he kind of like runs back towards his car, and then he kind of like goes back to the street, and you can just see the wheels turning where he's like, do I try and chase the garbage truck on foot? Do I go get my car? Like, what do I do? Where did it go? And I just love the way he plays it as like, he has no idea what the plan is here. He did not, foresee this potentially happening, and he's just completely shit out of luck.
Yeah, it's a great performance in that sequence.
Yeah, no, and that's what I think works so much about the film. Again, it's constant. There's a constant sense of something happens, and Elliot Gould immediately has to have a reaction to it and start formulating a plan based on, developments that are being made. And it kind of welcomes you into that decision-making process a little bit, because you're obviously watching him do it, but you're also sort of like considering it, because the film is giving you enough information that you're always considering the information that's being given to you as well. And it makes the suspense sequence, like in particular, like when he starts plotting with Elaine to basically find a way to get that key back, is where he feigns the situation where he's going to play the bank teller. She's going to play, sort of like a rich client who's going to come into the bank and basically pretend that she has lost her key, and they need the guy to come in and, open the safety deposit box for them.
Yeah, they need to get a locksmith in.
Right.
Yes.
And they need to do it before Julie comes back.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that sequence is so tense and so well done.
Oh, yeah.
Where
the looking at the clock and all that, it's great.
Well, and also just their performances in that scene, like Elliot Gould raising his voice to be like, yes, ma'am, I can do that for you. Yeah, we'll get the locksmith in as soon as
Are you sure you can't find your key? Did you look everywhere? And I love that he does that also. When she gets in, they get the locksmith and they go in and they open it up, and she's she basically has to like pretend that she's, I don't know, checking in on something, or she's getting something from there. And there's like that little moment where she kind of considers taking the money herself and walking out of the bank with it. And they're kind of fighting about it, and then Gould just like speaks really loudly, oh, so you are returning your valuables to your safe deposit box, like kind of like, I've said it, now you have to do it.
And I love how like not really seriously she takes it as well. Like before that, when he's just kind of questioning her, she's laughing and she's not playing the part correctly or anything like that. It's a great like contrast between the two, who Elliot's trying to do this just so focused, not get himself fired or in trouble, and she just doesn't have as much risk, so I think she's not taking it as seriously. And it's really comedic, honestly.
Yeah. Oh, also, wait. I was going to bring this point up earlier, but we should note the reason that they need to do it before Julie gets back from her lunch break is because she might recognize Elaine because he brought Elaine as a date to the wedding of John Candy and one of the other bank employees, Louise.
That's
and
right.
I feel like we got to mention that little subplot because I just like
For sure.
I love that so much. That she's kind of this like new banker there when the film starts, and she ends up like getting married to John Candy, who's in like a pretty small role, but I think is very fun in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of his. From what I understand, it is one of his very earliest roles. We got all kinds of Toronto legends going on in here.
Yeah.
I just love that.
Yeah, no, immediately when I was Rick Dalton pointing at the screen, like immediately when John Candy was just walking around in the background, I was like, that's John Candy.
I love that Louise like shows up to work wearing like the t-shirts that say like bankers do it with interest. It's so good. It gets me every time.
Yeah, there is a lot of just like really funny little character detail to this. I also love the manager who during this scene is like relaying to him the importance of banking. I can't remember like the exact line that he gets, but he is saying something like banking is one of the most important jobs in the world. We keep the world going round or something. I can't remember exactly what it is, but I remember just being like, that is just such a funny little detail to throw into the suspense sequence, because obviously he could not give a shit about banking right now.
Yeah.
Furthest thing from his mind. While he's trying to make sure that he can, sort of get this money back. And the scene sort of like ends on Julie is making her way back in, and to distract her, he has to reignite his relationship that he kind of starts with her a little bit earlier in the film.
So mean.
And he kisses her, and it's like, we have to take chances in life. And then he clearly does it just so that Elaine can get it out of the bank in time. And that reaction that he has right when he's done it, he's like, okay, relief, she's out of the bank, we're safe, we've done it. And he's like, all right, I know that I just did something very romantic, but I need to go. And we need to forget that this just happened. And Susanna York's like expression of just just like complete confusion.
Yeah,
It's great.
It's amazing. She has like tears flowing down, but she's smiling as if there's like so much anger built up, but she doesn't quite want to release it yet. And it's such an oddly sad little scene.
But there's also something interesting in that dynamic, because with that kind of setup, you'd almost expect that the dynamic would be more so that, she's interested in him and he's kind of been, pushing her off, and now he's like using those feelings to manipulate her so she doesn't go back in. But their dynamic is kind of the opposite, where you get the sense that he's kind of not always, kind of pursuing her. I think very much that kind of like, I'll be here waiting if you ever want to try dating me. Now he's kind of once again being very like forthright about those feelings. And I think it kind of puts her in a position where, she's not quite sure what she wants. I think it's very... for Julie, it's very much a situation where she is maybe kind of interested, but not quite sure. And she has like other complicated feelings with like her boss who's married, who she's dating, and all this stuff. So it's a very interesting kind of little glimpse at like their dynamic and their relationship there.
For sure.
Well, you can tell a little bit, I think, that she is interested in this side of him that is a little bit more, confident and not timid, but also he doesn't want to invite her into that because his mask is obviously his cover for that. So he doesn't view her as like someone who would be his partner in crime the same way that he is allowing Elaine to be. Obviously, until like the very, very end of the film. He does imply it kind of earlier in the film a tiny bit, where he talks about, how he has this daydream that, if he just had $48,350, maybe he'd use that to get away and start a new life. And it's just a little daydream that he's got. And she seems, sort of welcome and attracted to that idea a little bit, but he is just so obviously swept up in this cat and mouse game that he's playing with Christopher Plummer that he doesn't even pay her any sort of attention. We actually forget about her for a large part of the movie when it's spent with Elaine until he has to go back to the bank for the safety deposit.
Right.
But at this point, I think Christopher Plummer makes his way out of prison, and we get what is probably a strangely maybe too horrifying sequence.
Oh man, it is violent.
Yeah, where he finds out that Elaine has betrayed him for gold and is now sort of like working with him, and now that not only has he lost the money, he's also lost her to the same fucking guy. He's obviously so like insanely pissed off about this that he slits her throat and decapitates her on the broken glass of Elliot Gould's fish tank.
Ugh.
Yeah, and that shot of him just like sliding her neck across the glass, and it's like a good
Comes out of
4
nowhere.
seconds, like pretty close up, and they have like the blood going down the glass. It is brutal. It is a really filthy death. Like, oh my god.
From what I understand, I think Gerald didn't actually want that in the movie. I think that was I don't know if that was like in the script and they kind of were forced to have it in, but I think he didn't want that. I think it was a little contentious inclusion of kind of appealing to something a little schlocky exploitation horror over the kind of, like you said, like cat and mouse heist shtick that the rest of the movie operates on, because
you definitely
really
feel that,
and it's totally out of nowhere. Like we see violence from Christopher Plummer before that, when he kind of like beats up the sex worker at the sauna and stuff like that, and you definitely get the impression he's not a good guy. He doesn't treat women well. He doesn't really treat anyone well. But that really takes it to like a real gnarly level of upsetting violence.
Yeah, it's very severe and very personal in a way that you don't realize quite. I mean, like maybe if they had spent more time developing his relationship with Elaine and that how that betrayal was that personal to him on some level, but it definitely is just like you don't really get how it's any more serious than Elliot Gould like stealing the money, and he definitely didn't decapitate Elliot Gould, or that wasn't his first thought anyway. But also, I don't know, maybe just he's had it up to there. He's done.
That's kind of what I.
Well, I also think it's yes, like an act of violence against her for betraying him, but I also think he very deliberately wants Elliot Gould to find the body. He wants her to be left there for him to just like have
and
this
in
his apartment.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, it's in the fish tank, which we obviously know is super important to him.
It's the same thing as like when he pinned the fish to the wall. This time it's just another personal thing where he's like, "Look what I did," and to something that to a person you loved and a hobby that you loved, I guess.
Because when Elliot Gould arrives on the scene and he sees that really horrifying image of her decapitated head sitting inside the broken fish tank, it's like the one time in the film he is like really, really upset. And he almost breaks down, but then immediately after, he's washing the blood, he's rolling her body into the carpet, which he's then going to go dump in the foundations of some other condos that they're building or something.
Oh my god! And the sequence of him trying to get out of the apartment with her body in the carpet. And there's, I think it's like a mail delivery thing. I'm not sure. But there's someone kind of going up the stairs and he has to kind of snake his way down the outside of the like stairwell thing. I love that set piece.
Yeah, and it also just shows like obviously, I mean, Plummer's character is just an outright psychopath, but there is something really, really gross and awful about the way that Miles is able to just wrap her up into a carpet and dump her into a construction foundation, so that he's once again not caught. Like it's just
that's what's so intriguing
evil,
about his character is like he's at the point where this has escalated to decapitations in his apartment, and he's still not thinking,
let's
maybe
wrap
I
this
should
up.
call some people for help.
Like, goddamn, man.
Instead, he's thinking about his own self-interest. And what's so amazing, and what I think took the movie over the top for me, is that he continues with that well beyond when, the movie even suggests it. Because at this point, he is like, okay, I want this guy off my back. I'm just going to give him the money. So he goes back into the bank, but he insists that it needs to be handed to him at the bank because it needs to be a public place where obviously you can't just kill him. So they kind of both agree that Plummer is going to come to the bank in disguise. He's going to rob the bank again, but this time Miles is going to give him all of the money. This is actually a scene where he's grabbing the money and the guy goes, I'm concerned about your attitude about banking.
Yes.
But this scene actually blew me away, because at this point, for some reason, once again, I like the characters in the film, I kept underestimating how far he was willing to go. Yeah. And I genuinely thought, okay, he's going to give him the money this time. But holy fuck, Christopher Plummer shows up in drag. Great image. Love seeing that.
I love the close-up of him going down the escalator, and it's just it's further
so
revealed as the closer you get. It's great.
And he comes down and he robs the bank in drag, and he gives him the money. And once again, he only gives him the float. And he goes, "Okay, no, you're fucking with me again. Like, this is..." And he points the... Oh no, sorry. He doesn't know that he just given him the float. He actually gives him, the money and says that it's all in there. But Christopher Plummer, basically, he's gonna betray him and agree and obviously not go through with the agreement not to hurt him. And he's like, I'm actually just going to kill you right here and right now. But Gould's character, having anticipated that, actually only once again gave him the float and actually stages his own stick-up banknote saying that he's got a gun. He triggers the alarm, screams, he's got a gun. Before he's even pulled the gun, Christopher Plummer shoots him and runs away, gets taken out by the mall cop, gets shot down.
That mall cop,
and
man.
That mall cop, he's going for it.
He's had a crazy week, I gotta say.
He's ready to go. No one's getting away the second time.
Man. He pulls that gun quick.
and that moment where he is just like he's like mortally wounded, he's on the escalator, they bring him down, and he looks at the money and he realizes that he's been cucked once again, and he was only ever given the float money again, despite again how severe of a place this has gone to. Elliot Gould is still playing around, and he says to the guy something along the lines of, he gave me the bank's money. And obviously we know what that means, but the security guard has this great line where he's just like, what the hell did you expect him to give you? His own money? Yeah. So good.
And then Plummer is just falling. I love that he runs up the down escalator, so then when he gets shot at the top, he kind of just falls downward with the escalator and just ends up at the bottom. It's just such a unceremonious way to go out.
And then only to be to reveal that news to the guard and for him to not read it correctly. It's just so defeating, and then he just dies.
Yeah.
It's such a humiliating and I can say with 100% certainty that when I queued this movie up, I did not expect it to end on an image of Christopher Plummer in drag being executed on the Eaton Center escalator.
and we're gonna get to it, but that's a slight connection to Cape Fear eventually too, which I found very funny and interesting.
Hell yeah!
If you recall the finale, which we'll get to.
You might have to inform me. I don't know that I remember.
Okay, you know what? I'll save it then. I will save it.
Hell yeah.
Oh, well, wait, yeah, no, I just remembered, yeah.
Yeah, I think you know what I'm talking
about. Oh, you guys are both going to have to bring it up. It might come to me as we get into the segment.
We will. It took me a second there. I was thinking of what happens, and yes, actually very good. I hadn't thought of that, but we'll discuss.
Yeah, we'll discuss. We'll keep it cryptic for now.
Well, pivoting towards the reductive rating round, which for you, Anna, is where we remove all the words, all the nuance, and give the movie a rating between 1 and 5. But it's also turned into closing statements, or if there was any scenes or lines that we didn't hit that you wanted to make sure that we brought up, we also do that here too. But for me, this one actually got a high 4 from me. I really thought that, again, we talked about, the sort of like procedural, logistical cat and mouse suspense stuff that's very Hitchcockian, and I think really works. But it does have, again, that sort of like 70s crime movie grit to it, and then a little bit of that sort of like Canadian low budget charm, which I always enjoy. There's a lot of really great Toronto location work. One thing I wanted to bring up was Elliot Gould in his bright yellow convertible speeding down the DVP. Loved seeing that. Just seeing a shootout in the Eaton Center. Kind of freaky, actually.
Yeah, pretty wild.
But yeah, the thing that really took it over the edge for me was how downright thorny it ended up getting, especially with Gold as someone who is very keen manipulator, very willing to endanger himself and everyone around him for $48,000. And Plummer is so psychotic that it actually sometimes makes you forget how kind of gross Gold is being. And like when he wraps Elaine's body up into the carpet and just disposes of it in the foundations of the building that they're building next
where
to
no
him,
one will ever find it. Like,
yeah, just the image of him dumping his girlfriend's headless body into cement foundations. It's so bleak and kind of heartless in a way that is logical and kind of understandable, but it even though the film kind of does have this ending where, Julie ends up realizing that he is the robber, but that they are going to get away with their daydream, it's supposed to be kind of like this happy ending. I couldn't help but think of just kind of how nihilistic that is, that the person...
Yeah, there was some dark irony for sure.
The person who is the most successful is the one who is just the best at manipulating everyone.
Exactly,
And there is something sort of like... dark about that, and I thought it was actually kind of cool too that this ended up being a really big hit in Canada. The US, it kind of got a bit of a tepid response, even though the reviews were good for it. But in Canada, this ended up winning best feature film, best director, best editing, best score, and overall sound at the Canadian Film Awards.
Oh wow, that's
so
awesome.
This was like a full out recognized hit when it came out in Canada. And yeah, I was really glad that Anna brought it on, because this is way darker and way more well made than I kind of expected. Because again, I haven't even seen a Daryl Duke film, but I'm gonna have to go check out. I saw that he did another film called Payday, which people said was good, and that film has Rip Torn in it. So I'm gonna have to go check out that next.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'd also give it the 4 out of 5. I mean, watching Plummer be a complete psychopath was a lot of fun. But I really, really loved the complicated nature of Elliot Gould's character, because once again, just playing him so timidly and innocently, but just watching every step he makes become more awful and kind of more evil, honestly, and just filthy, was very interesting. And like you said, with that ending, it does kind of give this oddly nihilistic feel, because we know everything that happened prior, and now we're getting this kind of hug and kiss romantic ending that just doesn't feel like it fits, but oddly, because we know so much about what he's willing to do, it really does. But there's like this dark irony to it that I really like, and yeah, just to see like the Toronto Mall and stuff, that was really cool. So yeah, 4 out of 5. I'm gonna have to check out some of this guy's other films, because I really liked it.
Yeah, no, I love the idea of kind of like Elliot Gould and Julie like get away and they go find like a island to live on, and they're kind of just like getting this like fresh start with the money. And I just kind of want like that moment where she sort of says like, so whatever happened to Elaine?
Yeah. He does say something like, one day I'll tell you everything or something like that. And I'm like, I don't think you will, though.
He's not gonna there's everything, and then there's everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, for me, I would say like, can I say like 4.5 out of 5?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
sure.
I love this. I think this is just, it's such a little gem. It really took me by surprise just how smart it is, and also how grimy it can be. I think it's funny, and it really gets dark at times. I love Elliot Gould so much. I think I could just watch him read a phone book and be really, really happy. I just think he's great. I love how he plays these characters, and yeah, kind of that like long goodbye where it almost feels like, there's a little bit of problems come to him, and he's just like, all right, well, I'm going to deal with this. And, you know, he's not necessarily seeking out robbing the bank. It kind of just presents itself as this opportunity. And yeah, I think he's just wonderful. I think Christopher Plummer is incredibly menacing, and it's just really fun that, you know, you have this like little movie starring the two of them, and they're both like fairly, you know, big names now. We obviously know them. And they're just great in it. Yeah, I really like this movie. I think it's a Christmas classic for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it might become that for me as well. I definitely enjoyed watching Christopher Plummer as an absolute psychopath dressed as Santa and in drag mostly.
Yes. And it's such a rewatchable film. It's just something that I think I don't get tired of, even just like noticing, you know, scenes in Toronto. And even if I'm not kind of like checked into exactly the plot, there's enough happening on screen that I can kind of just like watch and enjoy. Yeah, it's a real treat. I like this movie a lot. I was very happy that you guys hadn't covered it, so I could kind of bring it on.
Yeah, I hadn't even seen it, so this was awesome to be introduced to.
Listeners of our show are definitely going to enjoy this one. Oh, and I hope that they're going to go check it out.
Yay, me too.
But that being said, I think that's going to wrap it up for The Silent Partner. We are going to be right back, and we are going to be talking about Cape Fear.
Here.
I called the vet, and then he died.
Lee, I told you not to let him out.
I didn't let him out! I didn't let him out!
It would be unethical of me to advise a citizen to take the law into his own hands.
You thought about me last night, didn't you?
Evening, ladies.
Hello?
I think we're alone now.
Where are you from?
I'm from the Black Forest. Maybe I'm a big bad wolf. Do you mind if I put my arm around you?
All right, we are back, and we are talking Cape Fear, the 1991 American psychological thriller film directed by Martin Scorsese. It is obviously a remake of the 1962 film of the same name, directed by J. Lee Thompson. Who we haven't covered that film on the show yet, but we have talked about Mr. J. Lee Thompson. He directed what was it, Death Wish 4: The Crackdown?
Hell yeah!
Eventually, we'll get into maybe some of his Planet of the Apes sequels. He did a lot of really. J. Lee Thompson was one of the coolest like journeyman filmmakers of like the 60s into the 70s, and then by the 80s he was just making canon picture movies with like Charles Bronson. I just went on the We Hate Movies podcast and talked about his movie 10 to Midnight.
Oh yeah, I've seen that picture you were tweeting about. Like, is this for jerking off or something? Like some weird
just
sex
Charles
device.
Bronson just throwing like a makeshift fleshlight into the killer's face, being like, "It's for jerking off."
Oh, I gotta watch that.
It's a good time. But before he was got into canon pictures, J. Lee Thompson, you know, he did horror films. He did, you know, sort of like prestige sci-fi films. He did all kinds of different things. And the original Cape Fear is obviously it's a major Hitchcock riff. They literally stole Bernard Herrmann to do the score for that film, who did a lot of the music for Hitchcock. And the original film is just like sort of a series of like expertly crafted, like sweaty kind of voyeuristic suspense sequences that are all tied together by the troubling contradiction of trying to contain primal instincts of like sex and rage and violence within a sort of civil and legal framework. And in that film,
in the older one, it still has that whole like kind of psychosexual thriller aspect to it as well. Not just like the crime thing.
Definitely, but only it's Robert Mitchum, obviously from Night of the Hunter, who plays the sex offender role. Robert Mitchum is incredible in that film. Also, Robert Mitchum appears in this film as well. I guess Gregory Peck does as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Kind of like reversed, like, you know, the good guy versus the bad guy in this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But loosely, Cape Fear, in both versions of the film, are about a character named Max Cady, who has recently just been released from prison after serving many years under a rape sentence. In the original film, it's because Gregory Peck's character basically just testified that he witnessed the rape. And which puts him away, which kind of sparks his revenge mission in this film. They actually have Nick Nolte's character, who's playing the Gregory Peck role, is actually his defense lawyer, who intentionally kind of like throws the case to get him thrown in prison. But in both cases, while Max Cady is in prison for a number of years, he studies the law, and he becomes an expert on that very vague line in the legal system between legal and moral, and so essentially that he can better abuse it for his own psychopathic ends. Because it's not technically a crime to say vague threats or to sit on someone's fence or to stalk them. And it did remind me, actually, of one of the lines from 10 to Midnight that Charles Bronson gets. Now, he says it in a particularly fascist context, but it works for Cape Fear as well. I remember a time when legal used to mean lawful. Now it means loophole. And that is essentially the suspense of the film, is how Max Cady character can find very legal loopholes to enact his violent impulses that he wants on the people that, in particular in this film, he wants to get revenge on. And what happens over the course of this film is a series of, once again, cat and mouse suspense sequences, but in this time, practically full out, like, stalker horror sequences between two people who understand the law and in all of its flaws and dirty little secrets as well.
I just want to
thing. Go ahead.
I think it might be the Robert Mitchum character who explains to Nick Nolte, like, you know, the law is kind of set up for, like, some stranger robbing you in the dark, and, like, this sort of personal, like, vendetta. It's not really set up to protect against that. So really just, like, Max Cady, like, exploiting all of that. But.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first sort of like immediate difference I would say is that the original film, very classically Hitchcockian, black and white. It's very inky, and it's very again sort of classical in a sense. And this has some elements of that, but this is absolutely, I think, as Jamie and I have both said when we reviewed it even separately, this is Martin Scorsese possessed by Brian De Palma for a couple weeks.
Absolutely.
All the like these like pinks and greens during the fireworks scene, and then like the split diopter shots. It's just the close-ups of sweating people, the Dutch angles, everything just feels very De Palma for sure. Yeah. I mean, like it kind of shocked me the first time that I watched it, because this doesn't really feel like any other Scorsese film. Actually, at the time, it was kind of noted that it was a well done film, but a lot of the reviews kind of pointed out that this feels a little bit like an impersonal film for Scorsese. It feels like a for-hire genre hire. Which, to be totally fair, it was. Actually, Spielberg somehow was supposed to make this film at one point. Is it just a Spielberg to like his craft then? Because I mean, when I watch this, I feel like there is someone really passionate behind the camera here.
Scorsese's just obviously a legend. He's just amazing.
Of course.
Just on and that even something that's an impersonal for hire project, he's not going to tone it down. He's going to do something. At all. He's going to do something else. But it is, I think, it does explain why it feels different than any other Scorsese film. In many ways. Not that he doesn't, sometimes go psycho mode, and not that sometimes that he doesn't, get absurd with some of the style, but it's just it's so perverse, I find, in ways that he doesn't normally go, and highly sexualized in a way that reminded me more of De Palma as well.
Yep.
But you're right, like the intense colors and also just the fact that he's doing kind of like a thriller. I feel like he doesn't usually do like sort of like simple thrillers like this. For sure. But what immediately kind of stands out is that De Niro also is treating this role, which is kind of sort of filthy and trashy in a way, and he treats it like he's gunning for that Oscar.
Yeah, he makes a meal out of Max Cady. It is wonderful to watch.
The dude paid a dentist to fuck his teeth up for this role.
Oh, really? That's wild. Like even the introduction to his character is just so absolutely incredible. I mean, you're introduced to an absolute powerhouse right away, like the big cross on his back as he's just doing these like pull-ups in his fucking jail cell.
De Niro with his like 3% body fat going on. I was like,
yeah,
dude,
he's
chill
cut
out.
in this. It's ridiculous. And he's got all these like vengeance Bible verses tattooed all over him. He's wearing that like that hairnet, so his hair is constantly flat and slicked back, and it's just it's such a character. It's such a powerhouse.
Yeah, well, and he's also got like the Joker hair going on a little bit too. I was like, man, he's gonna become the Joker. That's what this film is. Well, and even one of his tattoos is a clown holding a gun and cigarettes and stuff.
And the
Bible.
Bible.
He's got, like,
I think it's a clown holding the Bible and a gun, which is one of the craziest things I've ever seen. And then to have him like the introduction to kind of like just put him in the face of the audience, to have him come out of the jail, and then there's lightning in the background, and he does that close up right into the camera. He just basically walks into the camera.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I mean, this opens
such
on
a tone.
The same as a lot of Scorsese around this time period. Opens with a Saul Bass title sequence with like a hawk and a water and an eyeball and drops of blood, and then
Big
we start getting
score.
these. Yeah, well, it's Bernstein, but they are explicitly reusing some elements from the Bernard Herrmann score from Cape Fear, which also, it's worth noting, De Palma always... when he could, he hired Bernard Herrmann to do his scores because obviously he loved Hitchcock so much. But then also, even after that, he basically did Bernard Herrmann ripoff scores for the rest of his career. So
you know
that also contributes to the De Palma feel.
You know the horn part. It's very famous for Cape Fear. The big horn kind of like 4-part melody thing that pops up anytime Katie is looking into the camera or something like that. Is that based on the original score in some way? Is that a wholly original part for this 80s version or 90s version, I guess?
Well, as far as I know, most of the music was remade,
basically.
It was remade, but most of it is taken from Bernard Herrmann's original compositions.
Oh, very cool. Very cool.
And in fact, they actually used some other Bernard Herrmann, like some unused scores from some other Hitchcock stuff that he did.
Oh, sweet.
So yeah, a lot of it is it's this guy Bernstein, obviously like conducting it himself, but a lot of it is Bernard Herrmann compositions, and it's just so awesome hearing kind of like that kind of what brings you back to kind of like that classical suspense thriller. But then the images are so gross. Like again,
very modernized.
He's so ripped and slimy, and again that shot of him sort of like moving out of the prison with the giant storm in the background, and again his face going straight into the lens, and you can see like every like pore and little tiny facial hair and everything.
Oh yeah.
It's really horrible, and again the amount of like sort of like zoom transitions and camera moves that are very big and ostentatious for Scorsese, and the queasy like sense of like sweatiness. It is all very De Palma like, doing the reverse shot split diopters. There's very intense stylized colors, and even the performances are just like over cranked in a way that like De Palma would usually do.
Yep.
Because De Palma is not always looking for that sort of like that quiet sense of intimacy or sensitivity that you sometimes feel in a Scorsese film. He's always like, he sometimes lets the performers go just as big. And man, Nick Nolte and De Niro doing these sort of like southern accents that they're doing.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Very fun. It's very cartoony, I guess, for Scorsese is kind of like what it feels like.
Especially Katie, because Katie is just like, he's got the deepest southern drawl, and it does very much feel cartoonish in a way, in a very good way.
Counselor.
Yeah, counselor. Yeah, exactly.
It's so good.
Yeah, you're 500 meters apart, or I guess they wouldn't say, they'd say yards.
Yeah. 500 yards, counselor.
And even just like the first scene where they kind of are, their paths once again cross, where Nick Nolte is like taking his family to the movies, and Max Cady is just like puffing up a cigar, laughing obnoxiously loud. It's so good. It's so fun. And I just love that, like, they leave and Juliette Lewis's daughter is just like, why didn't you punch him?
Yeah, beat him up, Dad.
Yeah.
And I love the way that they film Katie in that scene too, because it's it's just right in his face as he's laughing obnoxiously, and even after the family leaves, the scene ends with him still maniacally laughing, like he never stops, and it really just shows like his lack of care, and also it's kind of the beginning of his like mocking Sam in a way. So it's a great introduction.
And also it introduces him as just he is a very disturbing presence in the film in general. Like both as a physical presence just in the frame, but also
a man you wouldn't want to approach.
Yes.
No, and he's just so disruptive. Just no matter what he's doing, you feel like even when he's just in the background of the frame, just like staring, your eyes are kind of like drawn to look at him because he's just such a an overbearing kind of presence.
Yeah, for sure.
And most of this film does become like honestly once again a series of cat and mouse sequences. Only it's Nick Nolte is being. And his family, obviously, is being pursued out of revenge. And one thing that I really appreciated about this, like one thing I found very cool in Scorsese's version, is that Sam Bowden, who's the character that Nick Nolte is playing, as played by Gregory Peck, is a very upstanding citizen who, he testifies against a rapist, and his domesticity is threatened by that as a result. He's sort of being punished for doing the right thing. And Nolte's plays the character like much more flawed. He's clearly like kind of like a serial cheater. He at one point he like hits his kid, and instead of just testifying, he actively breaks the law in order to get justice against Katie. Because it's worth mentioning, Katie in both versions of this film is just a full blown rapist. In this film, they actually say that he raped a 16-year-old girl. So you do understand that Nick Nolte trying to get that man locked up, he's doing a good thing.
Yeah,
but it is interesting
very
that
thorny there with like so he served as his like public defender and had a report that the victim was quote unquote promiscuous that he then kind of buried, where something like that, especially at the time this would have taken place in the late 70s,
right,
that something like that being used against the victim would have gotten Max Cady less of a sentence because it would have been in his favor, and he kind of like buried that. And it's just like a very thorny situation of like truly like what is right there. Like, do you use something that you shouldn't, but you have this report that would help your client, but like it's not maybe morally correct to do so. Like it's a very like complicated little change from the original that I think is really smart.
Yeah, and I think Sam, like the character, also understands that, even that system is flawed, because near the end he even says to Katie, he's like, "What does it matter if she was promiscuous? That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't give you the right to rape her or anything like that." So it does show that he has an understanding that the system itself would have screwed the victim over. So there's a lot of complications with that.
Well, yeah, but and then there's also the complication that technically by law your public defender has to defend you.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
That
to the best of your ability too. Like it has to be so by law. So there's so much.
So he technically didn't do that, which gives Katie like kind of like an interesting sort of like righteous leverage in escalating the scenes of vengeance that Mitchum's character in the original film didn't quite have in that way. It obviously doesn't change the fact that Katie is a vicious rapist and killer who's walked right out of a De Palma film.
But while you're watching it, you kind of understand why he's not getting in trouble, because he's just riding that fine line.
Yeah, it's just slightly more morally complicated enough to make the whole thing feel a little bit ickier. I actually thought that Ebert had a really good line in his review that I think summed up that dynamic perfectly. And he wrote that unlike the simplistic version of this film that we have seen in 100 thrillers, what Scorsese gives us is a villain who has been wronged, seeking to harm a hero who has sinned.
Yeah, yeah.
And so like that's just a very specific like moral complication that the original film doesn't have, that Scorsese very intentionally, I mean, like Scorsese literally said that when he read the original script, because he read it and was being offered it while he was making Goodfellas, and he said that he actually hated the remake script when he first read it, because he was like, it's the same movie, actually the Bowdens seem happier than
Right.
they were even in the original film, and he was like, I want this to be a very miserable family.
And it's kind of like the crumbling of Sam's family is why Katie can take advantage of so much of this
Yes.
stuff. So it really is like it's a very intelligent move on Scorsese's part to include more of that, because then all that distrust Katie can use to his advantage, and he does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and
no,
it's also
absolutely.
Just, no, I was just gonna say, even just like with that character, you know, where he kind of like, you think, okay, like he, you know, buries this report because he believes it's the right thing to do, because like who cares if the victim was quote unquote promiscuous, right? So you have that, but then you also have stuff where it's like he, you know, within his family, like he's cheating on his wife, and like even that like personal dynamic, you know, complicates how much we can like him or appreciate him or kind of view him as someone who has, you know, a moral threshold that like he puts above the law, because it's like, well, he's also cheating on his wife. Like, where are his morals at, you know? Or like maybe about to cheat on his wife. It's kind of unclear what that relationship is, but you get the sense that like it's not totally kosher here.
No, well, the thing that they suggest is, or that they imply anyway, is that he's done it before, and that what we're witnessing is kind of like the beginnings of what could be him doing it again.
Mm-hmm.
Or so what Scorsese I think does very cleverly is that he doesn't actually have the cheating on screen, but he kind of lays out like this scene where they're playing squash together, and they're sweaty and they're flirty, and like there's this sense that like Nick Nolte sort of has the impulse to do it. He's thinking about it. Yeah. The possibility is in the air.
It's like he could if he really wanted to.
Yeah, and credit to Alina Douglas too, who is actually in Goodfellas as well, who plays Nolte's law clerk, who has sort of like this flirtatious sort of like rapport with him. And meets probably one of the most gruesome sequences in the film, where De Niro
that poor woman
picks her up in like this sort of like imposed bar scene, and then he
because
handcuffs her
Nolte
back.
was supposed to meet her and he ditched her.
Yes,
she kind of you know is sad and goes to this bar where, you know, Max Cady picks her up. It's an awful thing that happens.
Yeah, and then like you have that just horrible scene after the violent scene with De Niro, where she's talking to Sam in the hospital, and she's like almost, you know, like blaming herself in a sense, like thinking how stupid she is because she wanted to show Sam up through using Katie and all that kind of stuff, and you're just sitting there so sad for her, because it's like, if you knew the half of it, this is not in any way, shape, or form your fault. These two are really going at each other here, and you got caught in the middle, and it's just it's a really heartbreaking scene for her character.
Well, and it's a really good update on the original too, because the original kind of has a little bit of this sort of like dated idea of the legal system being flawed in that it doesn't let us do sort of like vigilante justice a little bit. That's kind of the vibe you get a little bit from it, that it doesn't stop someone like Mitchum from doing that. But Scorsese takes that to like a full out sort of like rapist degree, to the point where you know, there's this really heartbreaking scene in the hospital that Jamie's talking about, where she basically acknowledges that she's just like, look, I've seen the inside of the legal system.
Yeah,
I've seen girls report rapes, and it's just humiliating, and it doesn't work. So she doesn't do it. And what's interesting,
and she
is
does
that,
it for Sam too, so that he doesn't get in trouble and shit. Which is like, to do something so selfless for someone who clearly is more selfish. It's really bad. It's horrible.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Katie too. It's made clear to Nolte that he basically intentionally chose her for that reason. And when he handcuffs her and he bites a chunk off of her face,
and then like spits
while
it
he's
out,
beating
like,
her.
And like her, there's something that adds to it because of the way that that her character is. Like, she's very very energetic and happy and always making jokes and laughing. And so like she's just this pure ball of like happiness, it feels like, even though that's the outside. Inside it feels like she has some struggles, but she, she's making jokes with Katie, she's laughing her ass off. She's very funny, honestly, in that scene. And there's just such a strong
that was
and
actually
quick transition from that to the beating, and it's just so jarring.
And it's
Sorry. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say also just like kind of tying back to Silent Partner, much like when Plummer kills Elaine, like it almost feels like there's, of course, like that violence towards her, but also part of it is how he can use that violence to upset the other male counterpart of it.
Right.
And like even just like he doesn't even Max Cady doesn't necessarily care about her. He's just using that violence towards her to get to Nick Nolte.
Yeah, and Jamie, I really liked your point about, sort of her personality, because I read up that it was actually Alina Douglas's decision that apparently she was supposed to start being scared like the second he handcuffs her.
Okay.
But she made the choice that she was like still going to be kind of like laughing and flirting like
That's
while
brilliant.
that part was happening.
I like that, yeah.
Because it just sets in that jarring moment where it's like the handcuffs are there. We know what this guy's capable of, but she thinks it's playful.
Yeah, the dramatic
Such
irony
a hard
just
cut.
goes up to like another level because you're just like, holy fuck, we know what this guy is capable of. Not
boy,
necessarily
does he-
on screen, but we've heard.
Right. And that also like the shot that they have when he starts the beating is like they do a close
silhouette
up of his fist, and then they cut back from outside of the apartment, and you just see the silhouette from the curtains, and it's just so brutal. Like without even really showing like the beating or anything like that, the implications are just so violent.
Yeah, it's very like viscerally upsetting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and again, it contributes to the way that he feels disruptive, because it is genuinely like a shocking moment, and after Sam like finds out that is what happened, there's like this really crazy montage of like various doors locking and windows closing as like Sam is obviously feeling like at any moment he could break in and do this to, his wife or daughter. And that's when he goes to Mitchum's character, because I think earlier they got Mitchum involved, who obviously played the original Max Cady, and in this film I think he's playing like the police lieutenant or something like that. They suggest that Max Cady has poisoned and killed their dog. And obviously there's nothing that Robert Mitchum can really do about that. But he says it in a way that's really funny. And the line that he says is, because he's like, look, this guy, he's stalking me. He's very likely poisoned my dog. He's very likely broken into my house. He has just attacked one of my assistants brutally. And what does Robert Mitchum say? He says, I can't bust someone for planning to rape your wife.
Yeah, man. Terrifying
shit. So what he suggests is basically that he use his family as bait.
Yeah.
That he lure Max Cady in, because once he does that, then they can actually bust him, or then they can actually, later on in the film they decide to lure him in because then they can sort of like, or they can righteously kill him if they can catch him actually on their property. Is what they eventually kind of hope for.
One of my favorite shots too is when like they're trying to get Katie to come to the house, and they have all these wires hooked up to one of Danny's old stuffed teddy bears, and it's just this so image of like using literal innocence as bait for Katie, and it's such a great image.
And even just I love like De Niro sitting on the like wall around their property where like Nick Nolte will kind of say like, oh, he was at our house. Well, did he break in? No, he sat on a wall. And it's like that's not illegal. He's not like coming over the property line. He's like just on the edge. Like it's such a clever thing of where he finds that like gray area of like clearly this is menacing, clearly this is threatening, but like what can you do about it? And I love that Gregory Peck kind of cameos as the lawyer who Max Cady hires to not
Yes.
only defend him when Nick Nolte wants a restraining order, but actually to get the restraining order on Nick Nolte for Katie.
Right.
Yes, because Nick Nolte hires Joe Don Baker, who, Jamie, you might recognize from, we just talked about him on John Flynn's The Outfit. We did with Brendan. He was kind of the guy who has the Southern charm guy who hangs out with Robert Duvall in that little 70s crime film.
Oh, nice, yeah.
So he gets hired as the PI, and the PI kind of takes a look at the situation, and he's like, yeah, you got a serious like dude on your hands here. I think De Niro says to a line when he confronts him saying, not a hell of a lot to do in prison, but desecrate your flesh and read Nietzsche. And so Joe Don Baker is basically like, yeah, this dude kind of like means business, so we should hire some dudes to just beat the shit out of him. And Nick Nolte at first is like, very upset about that suggestion. He's like, I can't operate outside the law. The law is my business. But obviously he's starting to get more unhinged. He's starting to go a little bit insane. Some of the shots when he's freaking out with the paranoia, there's like these very sweaty, like high angled tracking shots, like following him around his office and stuff like that.
One of my favorite sequences is when he's on they're having dinner, and at first they're discussing how it's like, hey, we can all relax, we're all calm, and then as soon as the phone rings, they all jump like crazy, and then Sam grabs the phone, and instantly Scorsese goes into this like Dutch angle for Sam, really close up, and then when you get back to Kersey, who's the investigator that he's talking to, it's just a straight shot on his face. So every time they go back and forth, you can just tell how unhinged and nervous and just a wreck that Sam is while on the phone with him. And they do that a lot. Like there's another great sequence where I think it's when the dog dies, and Sam gets a call from the office, and they do this really quick zoom on his face, and then do a quick cut into the car where he's just like super nervous and kind of like angry and not really knowing how to feel on his way to the house. There's some really awesome transitions like that just kind of express what the characters are going through, specifically Sam a lot of the time.
Yeah, there's like some huge like low angle dolly push-ins on him while he's smoking and freaking out as well.
Yeah. But speaking of Katie, I really do love that those two shots of the fireworks. It just shows like his kind of over the top personality and all that while he's smoking the cigar. It's fantastic. The colors are great too.
The really upsetting scene, and the scene that actually triggers him to decide that he is going to hire these guys to like beat Katie up, is the scenes with his daughter Danielle, played by Juliette Lewis, where he very creepily calls her and pretends to be like a sexy drama teacher that like is interested in the same novels, and fakes a little bit of sort of like a teenage angst, a little bit like that. And the camera like again does like full spins as he's like hanging upside down while he's on the phone with her. Just some crazy shit that like Scorsese has never ever done again.
Yeah. But I love that it starts upside down and then does the spin like as he's like upside down. It's fantastic.
But the way that he manipulates like Juliette Lewis, who's playing the teen daughter, her like kind of like loneliness and her family's sort of abrasiveness, and then a little bit of sort of like teen horniness a little bit, and the way that he sort of manipulates all of that is just very upsetting and very creepy, and that eventually is what because like De Niro like actually kisses Juliette Lewis, and that eventually is what.
That's a hell of a sequence.
Yeah, I mean, I also
that makes you feel disgusting. It really does.
But I think it's played so well, and again, into the whole thorniness of the film, that like she enjoys it. Like she really loves having this attention, and it's very much like. She wants like that bad boy who her dad is like, oh, he's not good, and she kind of thinks it's like fun, and it's everybody loves a bad boy. Well, not an ex-con rapist, but like she wants that attention. She's like 15 years old, and Max Cady comes in, and like De Niro I think plays it so well, where like obviously he is disgusting and vile and grimy, but like he's still De Niro fucking ripped, and he looks great. Like De Niro's hot, and like she's a 15-year-old girl who thinks he's just a bit of a bad boy, and it's so well played how it's like very clear that she's like a little bit into it because she doesn't understand the extent to like how awful he is and why her dad wants, you know, her to stay as far away from him as possible. And the scene that night when I think like she comes home and kind of like they know what's going on, and Nick Nolte is like confronting Danielle about it, and she's still kind of giggling.
Yeah.
Like she still thinks it's kind of fun. I love how all of that dynamic is played. It's just so gross, and it's so, like you said, it's completely ripped from a De Palma film.
Yeah, and there's something too that's
so
very
uncomfortable.
Strange about the image that, like, because in that scene, the theater scene, he does, before they kiss and the finger sucking and all that, he kind of like grabs her face, like it's aggressive, but there's this like I don't know what you want to call it. He's still trying to be this badass romantic self, if that's what you want to say. But then having the image of her father do it in a more aggressive way when she reacts the way that she does is just so like you get this very jumbled feeling in your head. It's just it's just interesting. I'm not quite sure what to read from it, but it's like the distrust for her father. Yeah, and like that distrust for her father is now growing because of Katie and all that. So it's
right. Well, and obviously too, she's upset with her dad because she's hearing him like fight with her mother over his, you know, cheating that he's
throughout
doing,
the film.
and she obviously hasn't seen what Nick Nolte has seen, which is obviously his assistant like brutally attacked and raped. So she honestly, from her point of view, she doesn't understand. Like she doesn't see the distinguishing factor yet, other than the De Niro just seems more charming, more fun to hang out with.
Exactly. Yeah. He's giving her weed, you know. He does that like tongue move where he like takes it out with his tongue and then gives it to her. Little trick I learned. That whole thing. Like he does have that badass.
Dude, some of his lines that he gets are so funny. Like that scene where that is what inspires Nick Nolte to finally hire the PI's dudes to attack him, and these three guys come out and start beating him, and they start hitting him with pipes and hitting him with chains and slashing open his chest a little bit.
What's wild too about that scene though is that it's not like they start and then it's kind of like an equal fight where he's getting hit a couple times, but then he gets them back. He is getting the shit beat out of him, and then and then he rises up and does it. It's just it gives this extra layer of like this unstoppable being basically, because I mean the dude is getting laid out by three guys with pipes. I oh man.
I was gonna say I really like Jodan Baker's like expertise there when him and Nolte are talking about it, and he's kind of like, 1,000 will get you three guys, and you don't want less than three. Like it's like in his personal kind of experience there. This is how many you need to take down one guy sufficiently.
Yeah. Well, and he really takes that beating, and then he comes back up, and he obviously starts getting them back. And Scorsese shoots this like really, really intensely. And Nick Nolte is also watching from behind a dumpster just off screen. So he gets a couple really cool sort of like anamorphic, composed shots where like De Niro is sort of like out of focus in the background. Like at first he's being beaten, and then he's making his way back up. And it's obviously very upsetting. And then De Niro, one by one, gets each one. And then he thinks he spots the counselor behind the dumpster. And he goes, come out, wherever you are, counselor. And he starts beating them all up. And he also gets this line where he's talking to like Nolte's character, but he's also talking to the guys. And he's also just maybe talking out loud. But in his big southern accent, he's like, I can outread you. I can outthink you. I can out-philosophize you.
That's the best one when he says that. I love that. Philosophize.
It's going to take a lot more than a couple whacks to stop me.
It's so good. Absolute powerhouse.
Yeah, it's just the way that like Scorsese is filming it. It's just like it feels filthy, it feels violent, and it just feels like grime covered in sweat. And De Niro just going full cartoon like Southern accent with it. I mean, at one point, what is the other thing that he reads out in that scene? I think I wrote it down. Oh, I am like God, and God like me. I am as large as God. He is as small as I. He cannot above me, nor I beneath him. And then he literally quotes it. He's like, Cilicius, 17th century. And Nick Nolte is like, God damn it, this dude, he just wants to brag about all the reading he did while he was in prison.
On another
and
level,
obviously
man.
all the fighting that he got into, because you assume that that's probably how he has become so good at violence.
And even earlier, I think he implies that he got raped in jail as well.
Yes.
So like, there's this whole like, and there's like a really dark irony to that too, that he doesn't quite understand that rape is horrible, and so it's like, yeah, remember when you got it done? But there's a lot of complications to his character when he starts bringing up his past in prison, but it's all implications, which I like. Nothing is outright said a lot of the time. It's usually like these subtle lines that imply a dark past within the prison or something like that.
Yeah, you kind of just have to take it as it goes. But this is when...
And it could also be him just trying to scare Sam.
That's
like
true.
just trying to like paint up this portrait of like, you know, you don't know what I've been through, and you know that's all the like sort of making him think like there's 14 years of that stored up, and he's ready to get that vengeance.
Yeah. I guess I shouldn't necessarily just trust Katie for his word.
Well, and what's kind of interesting too is that obviously we're kind of seeing, from the point of view of Nolte's character, who is experiencing all of these sort of like stalking and creepy horror sequences. And what's so funny is that it sort of climaxes in this sort of beatdown sequence. And what's so funny is that is when, as Anna mentioned earlier, Katie hires Gregory Peck to be his lawyer, to defend himself against a restraining order against Katie, and in fact actually get a reverse restraining order, because he is able to show his beatings. And he also recorded an earlier conversation where Nick Nolte sort of lost his temper and legitimately threatened him, even though, he at that point he wasn't actually really planning to do anything.
Yeah.
But those two things combined in a legal framework show Katie, or show Nolte's character to be the aggressor to the judge. So then the judge, actually does file the restraining order against him. And this is when Nolte basically, he loses a little bit of faith in the law, and is when he decides to go with Robert Mitchum's suggestion of actually, using his family as bait, and, hoping that Katie breaks into their home so that then he can justifiably kill him.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just speaking about Gregory Peck in that scene, what I like is that Gregory Peck has kind of been like a voice on the phone that Nolte has spoken to, of like a lawyer kind of giving him advice, and then he calls him up again and he's like, oh, I can't speak to you, like Max Cady retained my services yesterday. So Gregory Peck, his character kind of does, exactly what Max Cady is looking for the law to do, which is like, I'm sure, Gregory Peck does not personally morally agree with him, but he is going to do everything he possibly can as a lawyer to defend and support his client, even if it's going after Nolte, who he's previously shown to be in conversation with, and he's kind of doing that thing where he is putting the abilities and the loopholes of the law above any personal ethical beliefs.
Well, and also it's doing what Nolte never actually did, which was that if someone hires you to defend them, you have to defend them.
Yeah. They even have that scene where Sam is talking to, I think it's Kersey, and he tells him what happened and how he had a bit more evidence to help Katie but didn't use it. And even Kersey seems like he's offended by that. Like he's kind of like, oh, you didn't do your best job as a defense lawyer. You're a horrible human being.
Well, yeah, lawyers get in trouble, and you can get sued for that kind of stuff, because it's basically like the whole point is that you're there giving them the best legal defense that they can possibly have. So if your lawyer is working against you, super bad, and super bad obviously for anyone who hopes to work in that industry.
Yeah, for sure. And something I also liked about the setup where they're trying to get Katie to go to the house is that Sam has to like stay low because he's supposed to have gone on a trip somewhere, and it was supposed to be kind of a setup in that regard. But even those things, the situation to try to get Katie arrested or whatever is developing more distrust and kind of like a lack of respect for Sam from Danny, because she's just like she says something when he can't stand up because Katie might see him if he's looking. She says something like, "Yeah, remember, you can't stand up, Dad," and then storms off to her room. So it's just these like constant pile-ons of stress that she's having to deal with this situation, and even the things they do that helps doesn't really help her. At least
I love
right
that she
away.
always runs into her room and slams the door and just puts on like MTV. Like,
yeah, super teenage moment. Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Scorsese. But yeah, the final act of this movie is pretty much the exact same as the original film, where they with one added inclusion of the scene where he actually does break into the house. And he dresses up as the housekeeper. Villains dressing up in drag, also a combining factor here.
Yeah.
But he dresses up as the housekeeper who he kills.
That was
He takes
actually the thing
piano
I was
wire.
mentioning earlier.
Oh, that's what you were talking about.
Yeah, the little connection.
For some reason, my brain was going, I don't remember an escalator in Cape Fear.
Yeah, no, he dresses up. He makes himself look like the housekeeper, but he can kind of just like be hanging out in the kitchen.
Which is crazy. Like to watch Katie or De Niro like in the maid getup and turn around and then just start strangling the dude. It's just it's almost comedic how over the top and insane it is.
Yeah, and strangling him with piano wire until the hand holding the gun shoots himself in the head and his brains blow out like all over the fucking place.
And it's the piano wire that he took from the piano like scenes prior, like right sort of towards the beginning of the film.
Right.
Like you get the sense that like, oh, he's been in this house more times than we have seen.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's so and obviously what feels very De Palma-ish about this scene is Nick Nolte slipping in the giant pool of blood.
Oh my god, yeah. And then he just becomes completely unhinged, just like shooting randomly into the yard and stuff. Like, oh
yeah,
man.
he's losing it, man.
Yeah, just losing it.
He's on it. He's on his property, firing his gun into his lawn.
Yeah, oh my god.
And because like that's the added scene that they threw in here, because after that is in the normal Cape Fear where they head out to the big swamp, which is
so this is part of the classic version.
Yeah, well, because that's actually where the Cape Fear is.
Gotcha.
Like that's where the location.
Gotcha.
I'm going to become the Cape Fear. But so they basically just do a sort of like they replicate the big swamp set piece from the original. In the original, Mitchum, I think, strangles the PI in the swamp and he makes his way onto the property. For the most part, the beats are basically the same. Scorsese just heightens them to an absurd degree. Like there's none of the crazy boat sequence and stuff that they do in this one. It's more of like he breaks his way into the property.
Okay.
And like into the like cottage that they have there and everything like that.
What about
but yeah, this takes it to like a pretty horror movie extreme.
What about the that classic move of him harnessing himself to the truck or whatever? Because that's great.
No, I don't believe that was in the original.
No,
that's
I believe
amazing.
that this was an
for
invention
this
for this
film,
one.
which is so
That's awesome.
good.
Well, it's become so iconic.
Yeah.
It's known as like the Cape Fear move.
Yeah.
Is that you're hanging out underneath the car as it's moving.
And once again, I knew the reference from The Simpsons.
Yeah, I was just
From
about
The
to
Simpsons,
say,
yeah.
done so well in The Simpsons.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, definitely one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah.
But yeah, this whole sequence just becomes like, again, that storm that was kind of following De Niro at the beginning of the film. They kind of like find themselves in it now in this giant swamp.
I like the way you put that. That's really good.
Yeah.
Well, because that's what it feels like, because it's like, again, that storm, because Jamie pointed out, I think, right at the beginning, but like it's such an imposing wide angle shot to include that.
Yeah.
And then when they end up on the boat, it is just so like destructive and it's so overpowering. And I mean, like, De Niro's shouting about how they're in like the 9th circle of hell.
Yeah. Like they're not even on Earth anymore.
Yeah.
And he's like obviously like threatening to like rape his wife and child like right in front of him, until Juliette Lewis like pours lighter fluid on his face while he's lighting up like one of the film's many De Niro stogies that he's got going on.
Yeah, and then you have that insane sequence where he's setting it up as if he's in like a courtroom for Sam, and he keeps turning to the camera, like to the audience directly, and acting as if we're the judge, like that. He's just like, I know, Your Honor, but I have to keep going and stuff like that. It's just, it's so, it's like, it's unhinged, but it lines up with all of the awesome like stuff we've seen prior.
All the burns on his face make him look like he's like Freddy Krueger now.
Oh yeah, he looks like he's
having come back onto the boat.
Yeah, it looks like he's come back from the dead. Like it's,
yeah, and essentially he just wants Nolte to admit that he screwed him, because they later found the report that would have helped him years later. But yeah, that bit where he's like got a gun in his face, and he's staging Nolte like he's on trial, and some of the lines he gets, I wrote a couple of them down because they were so good. He'll like look back at the camera and be like, "I'm sorry, that was argumentative, Your Honor,"
because he smacks him with the gun.
He's a hostile witness.
Yes. Oh man.
Yeah, meanwhile, they're in like this elemental setting of the storm, and the camera is going like topsy-turvy, and De Niro is like screaming at the top of his lung about like hell and God, and how lawyers' words and philosophies like cost him tangible years on his life and everything like that.
Yeah. And this gets like,
it's nuts.
Truly biblical when the Danny and Lee, they jump out of the boat, so it's just Sam and Katie now, and eventually they get to kind of this like this shore area, and Sam is ready. Like he takes this giant ass rock and is about to just smash Katie's face in biblical style, and the water just rushes him away, and Katie starts to speak like in tongues and just purely bring the devil out, and it's just it's an unbelievable 5 to 10 minutes.
I'm bound for the promised land, I think is what he says.
Yep. And then that shot of him with just his upper half of his face, just the eyes, just
again,
watching
like
Sam
Plumber.
with no
It's
blinking.
the eyes.
Yeah. As he sinks into the water and dies, presumably. It's just like there's something so over the top, like truly biblical about those last 10 minutes, man. It's
well, and in typical Scorsese fashion, he has to introduce a little bit of a redemption element, a little bit of that religious element,
right?
Like that. He has that sort of like Christian imagery of like the washing away of the sins, and a little bit of like the washing the blood off his hands a little bit there.
I do believe there's
because
a story
basically
where a man,
something he has created has covered his family in like mud and blood.
yeah, and I do believe there's a famous story where a man does like crush another man's head with a rock. So I think that there was something there too with that kind of imagery as well. And
I think it's important too that he's denied that satisfaction,
yes.
like that catharsis of like eliminating this thing. He's actually just taken away by the storm.
It honestly
kind of important.
It almost felt like, since it's like in this biblical sense or whatever, it almost felt like if it was, God speaking to him or whatever, it was kind of like him not allowing him to murder Katie. Like it was like, I'll take that away from you so that you don't have to do that. I'll do that with the storm, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to be fair, I think to the credit of what a little bit, to me, it actually read also that part of De Niro's mission was to drag Nolte from respectable father and lawyer into the mud and blood with him, proving that in some ways he's a criminal as well. And then obviously in typical Scorsese fashion, they introduce some, the religious redemption elements and the washing away of the blood. But I think it was important to Katie that, I mean, he what does he say when they're fighting near the end there? He says, just two lawyers working it out.
Also, I Googled it because I was curious, and just speaking about the biblical implications, Cain murdered Abel with like a stone. Like I think the whole thing
Yes.
was he was bludgeoned. So
Right. So the original sin.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely the one I think I was referencing. Yeah, it's really cool. I love all those like biblical tie-ins and just this over the top directing from Scorsese. I love this movie. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, me too. And pivoting towards reductive rating round, this one gets the solid to high 4 for me as well. I think that Scorsese really takes advantage of that psychological assault aspect, cranking up the stylistic insanity and the subjectivity to the point that it reminded me a little bit, maybe because we just talked about it, but it reminded me a little bit of a similar idea that they're doing in that back third of Branded to Kill when we talked about. Specifically that segment where the #1 hitman in Tokyo basically just drives him crazy by stalking and threatening him and teasing him until he's like a ball of sweat and hallucinations. And Nolte, I think, goes through a very similar experience. Eventually seeing this biblically tattooed Southern psycho in his dreams, and he's freaking out about that. And I think getting to see, Scorsese get to go to Palma mode and get to do this like really oddball exploitation take on briefly a little bit of a courtroom drama and then a bit of like a psychosexual slasher to the point in some of the murder sequences. There's lots of vivid colors and the Bernard Herrmann score and the idiosyncratic camera choices and stuff, and it's very genuinely funny and perverse and scary in all the ways that I usually kind of associate with De Palma. So it was a lot of fun, and I do think that it gets at some really morally thorny ideas about what is legal and what is sort of like moral. And it doesn't really let any of its characters off the hook. It ends with everyone covered in blood and mud by the end of the film, and De Niro just screaming. You don't even get the satisfaction of seeing him killed like you would in a slasher movie. There's just this person exists because these elements exist in the world. He kind of gets just swallowed up by the elemental qualities.
It almost feels in a way like he ends. Whether or not it was like what exactly he set out to do, when he's singing like I am going to the promised land, it does feel like he is satisfied with what he's accomplished, regardless.
That's why I think that he's proved his point.
Yeah, exactly.
He is like I have taken someone who was respected in lawyers' offices and respected in his home, and I have made him just as ugly as I am, or at least looking that way.
Yeah, I would. I'd also give it the 4 out of 5. This honestly got closer to the 5 this time around. The more I watch this movie, the more I appreciate it. If you want to watch Martin Scorsese be possessed by Brian De Palma for 2 hours, then I would highly recommend if you haven't already watched this one, because it's a good classic, I would say. So yeah, check it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I also say 4 out of 5. I think it's great. You guys have said it all. I think just really, really gnarly and mean and ugly at times, and also super fun in just how much it goes for it. Love De Niro's performance. I think it's like over the top in all the best ways.
Yep.
Yeah, big fan.
He went out for it again. He paid a dentist to fuck his teeth up.
What
Apparently
a guy.
he went to the South and had just random civilians read lines into a tape recorder so that he could mimic them.
Wow.
He apparently went deep into researching on like sexual predator crimes, and so he was the one who suggested
that'd be a hell of a rabbit hole.
Where he bites the woman's face off, because that wasn't originally scripted.
Wow.
Dude, De Niro is just psycho mode. That's awesome. Holy shit.
Yeah, he went all out.
It shows. It's great. It's a committed
role. I
role.
think that'll wrap it up for Cape Fear, and I'll wrap it up for this week's episode. That was The Silent Partner from 1978 and Cape Fear from 1991. Thanks so much, Anna, for joining us and bringing these films with you. If you've got anything to plug, this is usually where we have you do that.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, and often writing at Film School Rejects. If you like to, just see people talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood incessantly, you can follow me on Twitter.
Sounds good.
That's what I bring to the table.
Hey, it's a value for sure.
Oh yeah.
For our listeners, we're going to be back in 1 week's time doing your guys' voted on bonus episode. By the time you guys are listening to this, we'll probably also have the vote, the poll up for the next vote. But essentially, now that we have enough patrons, we have you guys every 2 months vote on the double feature that we're going to be talking about in next week's episode. You guys voted for a Cronenberg double feature of Dead Ringers from 1988 and Existence from or Existence.
Yeah, hard to say.
Movie.
Yeah.
From 1999. This one was suggested by patron Cody Downs, and it ended up getting the most votes of any of the episodes. So we're going to be sticking around in Toronto Genre Fair, like Silent Partner, and then we are going to be back in 2 weeks after that bonus episode. Again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast for next week's episode. The week after, we're going to be back. We're going to be moving away from crime cinema, wrapping up Noirvember, and we're just going to go back to the horror because we can't be stopped. The next guest is going to be bringing on Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
Hell yes.
And Brain Damage by Frank Henenlotter, which some of you might remember we just did Basket Case back in Spooktober. So we're going to be following it up with Brain Damage, which I suggest everyone watch. So you better have watched it. You better have done your homework.
That's going to be a fun episode, I will say.
Yeah. So we're going back into horror for December because that's what the holidays are about.
That's right.
And obviously the week after that is going to be your guys' Christmas bonus episode, which we always do something themed for that as well. So look forward to that.
Beautiful.
But that being said, I think that'll wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks so much, guys, for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.